I would now like to welcome TechCrunch Editor-in-Chief Matthew Panzarino and Salesforce Chief Equality Officer Tony Profit.
All right. Thank you so much for being here. Let's see. Oh, let's start up. I think you've been working on a little something. You brought a little video clip. This is that segue, that awkward one where I pretend like I didn't know that he had brought a video clip until just a minute ago.
Surprise.
Yeah, exactly. But I do want to talk about what you're showing in the video. So let's watch that. So if we can roll that clip.
And let me just give you just a little preamble.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Right, so who here knows the term in the workplace context of self-ID and is working on something like that? Okay, handful. Okay, so think about self-ID, watch the video.
Can you tell just by looking at me?
Can you tell just by looking at me?
So can you tell by looking at me that I'm an Iraq War vet?
Would you guess that I am a pro bodybuilder?
I'm an avid college basketball fan.
I love Bruce Lee films.
I am half redneck.
I used to be a chubby kid.
Would you have guessed that I'm a swimmer?
That I'm Catholic? I did not learn how to speak English until I was in 2nd grade.
Just by looking at me, you wouldn't know that I was the first in my immediate family to graduate high school.
So would you guess that I'm undocumented and then that I got a degree from Haas Business School?
Would you assume?
What many people assume is that I'm happy, but many people don't realize that I'm scared.
I'm afraid of being misunderstood.
We're all afraid of something. We're all insecure about something.
Yeah, I wake up every day with the fear of deportation.
Lots of us are just afraid of what we don't know.
Don't assume, ask what you don't know.
You don't know about Islam? Ask me questions. It won't offend me.
And if you ask me, I'm Filipino.
I'm Apache and Comanche.
I'm very much proud of my spirituality.
I am a she.
I am a he.
I'm straight.
I'm a lesbian.
I am a husband. I am trans.
I am a 3-time cancer survivor.
I'm Mexican Chinese. I'm gay.
I am a proud Muslim.
I am an ally.
I am an ally.
Not only am I an ally, I'm a champion.
My truth does not have to be someone else's truth, but they are still true.
So we're asking you to tell us who you are.
Be seen and be recognized.
Be part of a more diverse and more inclusive culture.
Help us move forward together.
Because together, we are Salesforce.
Juntos somos Salesforce.
We are Ohana.
And Salesforce welcomes all.
Can I hug you? Okay.
Great, great.
Excellent. So that's a debut of something that will be public soon.
Literally in moments.
Okay,
so
moments.
It's 2:30, it's supposed to plan.
Very good. Okay, so let's talk about this self-ID program, why it's important to you, and where this idea comes from.
Great. So you think about your identity, and other than your name, the other parts of it that are important. I could go through the litany, but and I just love the DeRay and Megan and the conversation they just had, and how important it is to be your whole self and bringing your whole self, and how your self is indivisible. And so often in the workplace, there's dimensions of yourself that you're not able, even if you choose to disclose, you might choose not to disclose. But if you choose to disclose, that you don't have the opportunity to disclose. And so it's for us, at Salesforce, it's just super important to create a culture and an environment where everyone feels comfortable bringing their entire self to work, and that we can acknowledge, a new way to acknowledge the complete person. And so the dimensions that we're adding are dimensions about sexual orientation, gender identity, and your personal pronoun. And this is completely voluntary. And other than the personal pronoun, it's also completely confidential. But the personal pronoun, will appear on your internal chatter page. That's like your internal social network, right? And it'll also appear on the org chart. So people can address you by the pronoun that you prefer, which is a big, big deal. Other than messing up your name, messing up your pronoun, messing up your pronoun is probably more offensive than messing up your name. And so we want to get it right, and we want to make sure that, again, it's voluntary, but we're encouraging everyone so that you're not making people conspicuous by putting their pronoun at the end of their email signature, but no one else does it. They're saying, well, why does that person put their pronoun there? We want to make sure that everyone, we're encouraging everyone in the US, this is a voluntary US program, are identifying themselves on these dimensions. So it's something that we're literally launching today. This is the launch video, that you just saw, and thank you for the opportunity to share it. It's something that we're super proud of, and it's one small part of a mosaic of a hugely difficult problem, and Salesforce is not perfect, but it's just something that we're working on to build a culture that feels inclusive and where everyone feels seen and valued and heard, and they can bring their entire self into Salesforce. That's our ambition.
And what was the genesis of this? Did you find that, was it feedback from employees? Was it self-generative? Where did the initiative come from to make this expansion?
Right, and I'll talk about it for me personally. I've only been with the company 8 months, and so the genesis predates me. And many of the things that you hear about Salesforce and the things that we're doing on the path to equality, I show up and I'm like in awe and celebrating them. So I'm not the architect of any of these things, but I did early in my tenure with Salesforce spend some time listening to we call it the Ohana. And Ohana is a word that we use for our culture. And Ohana is the Hawaiian word for extended family. So listening to members of the Ohana, and we have these things called Ohana groups, and one of them is Outforce. And Outforce is the Ohana group for the LGBTQ community and their allies. And just saying, hey, what's important? And the things that are important that I heard, there's many things, but what rose to the top of the list was self-ID, was right at the top. And the other thing that really was right at the top, I'm not going to go through the whole litany, but another one was pride, and how impactful and inclusive our celebration of pride is around the world. And so those were two things, and I said, okay, I'm going to pick a couple things. We can't do everything with limited resources, and we're going to make sure that we advance the effort in pride is spectacular this year. It's even better than it was last year, and that we drove to have a self-ID program in partnership with Workday. We're not arguing we're the first company to do this. Other companies have done this. We're trying to push it a little bit further with the pronouns, and we acknowledge and celebrate and applaud the companies that have gone ahead of us in this work, and in the partnership of Workday here.
Now let's go back a little bit and talk about your transition from a long marketing career in various positions with companies. How did you apportion your time, or did you apportion your time to include diversity efforts during that period? And then what was the moment where you're like, hey, maybe I can make this my whole job?
Right. Well, actually, I had a short marketing career. Right, and I was in marketing at Microsoft for 2.5 years, and before that, I was, what we call in the business like an operator. Right, so I ran the operations for Carrier, the air conditioning business. I ran the worldwide operations there in United Technologies in Hartford, Connecticut, and Carrier is obviously well known today. And then I ran the operations for what's HPI today, HP Inc. And I ran the worldwide operations there as well. And then I did that over the course of about a decade, and then I worked in marketing. But in each of those domains, I found myself increasingly focused on the social, societal, environmental impact of the actions of the corporation of which I was a part, and found more and more of my time like a wedge just gravitating towards my time at HP, the impact that a huge supply chain, the supply chain there at the time was $55 billion with a B, dollars of cost basis, and the impact you could have on people as far away as China and Mexico and Russia and Turkey, et cetera, and the people that are working in the extended supply chain, as well as the impact on the planet and the carbon footprint. As I merged into my time in marketing at Microsoft, this was a time when much of the activism and first of all, DeRay, in terms of raising awareness, applaud him and his leadership and many other leaders like him. But just starting to see at my time at Microsoft a gap, and just thinking more and more while I was active, on human rights issues broadly. I was very active on issues for education for the inner cities in East Palo Alto and Oakland and San Francisco, Bayview, Hunters Point, and likewise for healthcare. But like a gap in terms of the impact in technology, and just saying, hey, how can I begin to make a difference, and particularly focused on black empowerment, for the folks at Microsoft. So began working on that, and it became an increasing fraction of my time, and pretty soon I was spending 30–40% of my time and my daily time inside and outside of work focused on issues of broadly, equality, but the societal impact of corporations.
And did you feel What did that feel like, I guess, the transition where you realized you were spending more of your time? Did it feel different than your other work? Is that why you were like, hey, I want this feeling all the time, or I want it more and more? Was it an internal thing, or was it just the gratification of helping?
No, it felt great. Man, I can't tell you how it feels to sit here and have that video be up there. I mean, a combination of pride and moved and emotion and tears welling up in your eyes, and having a feeling like I'm coming to work. This is my job, and I get to do that. That just feels awesome, awesome. And and I love the companies that I worked for before, and I love their mission, and it's obviously integral to society and progress and moving forward. But to be at a company and thinking, well, what am I going to accomplish this year? Okay, we're going to ship another 100 million PCs and printers, like we did last year, whatever the right number is, right? That next 100 million in terms of your psychic register, and I'm late in my career, right? That not ringing the psychic register, and then having the notion that you're having an impact on many lives, even just one life, right? And I reached a tipping point. It was with my son, and my son is now 21, and he's this amazing out and proud LGBTQ advocate, and I just hit a tipping point with seeing him and his courage and his advocacy, along with all the things I had previously working on with education and the environment and workers' rights and black empowerment and those sorts of things in tech at the companies that I was at, and hit this tipping point where the switch just, boom, it flipped. And just by, we talked about this backstage where you're talking about your journey, by luck or fortune or fate, right about that time, there was an opportunity at Salesforce to be the first Chief Equality Officer. Is that fate? Is that luck? Is that divine intervention?
Well, as we talked about, you got to be ready for luck, right? Okay, so Salesforce, let's talk about that. So you're at Salesforce, you've been there about 8 months. I think one of the things that people do recognize about Salesforce, and you can speak to this, obviously having been there a while now, is that it does seem to, at least from the outside, seem to be well integrated into the philosophy of the company to pay attention to groups, to be mindful about the way that the company is built. And I'm just curious how you think that can be translated to people in our audience that may be young founders or have positions of influence at young companies to start building it in from an early state.
Sure. And I'd preface my comments about Salesforce in every case with the company's imperfect. And I'm not standing on a stage, I would not stand on any stage and say, oh, we're great, we're perfect, and we're flawless, right? Having said that, it is an unbelievable culture and company, and the idea that you're working for a company that thinks so much about its culture that it has a word for it. And I've worked at other companies and many companies, and you think, to be intentional about culture and to create a word for it, Ohana, and then it's easy when you have it to say, okay, I can point to this and say, that's Ohana, and then when you see actions that are not aligned with it, say, but that's not. It's a great measure of accountability. Give something a name, to put dimensions around its attributes. So one of the great things about Salesforce, one of the great things about its founders, and two of the founders, Parker Harris and Mark Benioff, are still with the company, is right from day one. From day one, they built into the DNA of the company the notion that a corporation can be an agent for change, that it can be a force for good in society. And they created a model, they called it 1-1-1. So it's super simple, super memorable, that the company committed on day one to give back 1% of the time of the employees and invest that back in society, 1% of the equity of the company at its founding, which wasn't much then, but that's fostered $160 million of grants, over time, and 1% of the product. And that's enabled more than 30,000 nonprofits and educational institutions to be operating on the Salesforce platform. And so to your point, Matthew, is that to founders and people early stage, it's never too early. It's not the thing to do for tomorrow and to procrastinate and put off and say, well, when we're profitable, when we go public, when we get to round C or B or whatever it is, that we'll start thinking about this. These folks were thinking about it, in the very early days, and made these commitments. And the impressive thing is then it was immutable. They lived up to them. They both made those commitments, and then once they were flourishing and helping customers to flourish, they lived up to those commitments. So to the early stage entrepreneurs and leaders, it's never too early to think about the culture of the company, to think about how inclusive the culture is, to think about how diverse your workforce is, to think about your advisors and your boards of directors, right? How how inclusive are your advisors and boards of directors for kind of the early stage folks sitting in the audience?
Yeah, and especially for the very early companies, there's seed investors often set the tone. And there's a lot going on in early companies too, I find, as I talk to a lot of them, where there are many distractions. You know, there's so many things that need to get done, right? They see the path before them, they're very busy, they have their nose to the grindstone, and they trying to make something happen by holding these two things together and bashing them together. And it seems like there are so many distractions at that early stage. And so I was wondering if you had any tips for them to separate out this idea of culture as an additive element to how successful they'll be in the long term.
Yeah, one of the processes, I mean, first of all, one of the things that's magical about working at Salesforce is that you're at a founder-led company, the founder's still there 18 years later, and so you have a chance to spend, for me, I report directly to Mark, I spend hours per week in the same room with him in small groups and just seeing how he thinks about things and how he dissects a problem and how he leads. And one of the things that's impressive in his leadership is this notion of ordinal ranking. And you won't find 30 or 40 priorities, you know, in any dimension, in any part of the company, that Mark goes through a process of, is A more important than B more important than C more important than Q more important than F, and by the end of the day, he'll distill it down to something typically you can count on your 5 fingers. These are the most important things. So for our company, we distill it down to our core values, you know, which are trust and growth and innovation. And the fourth one is equality. So only 4 values that a corporation could have. That the fourth one is equality. So I would encourage anyone involved early stage is to distill down what's the essence of what the endeavor that you're embarking upon. If someone did an archaeological dig, 100 years from now, what evidence would they find that you even existed, and would it just be dollars or euros or bitcoins, or would there be some imprint left on society where you'd made a difference and you'd changed lives? And what would you be most proud of, as your legacy? I mean, naturally, many of these enterprises, not all, are for profit. Naturally, you have to serve the interests of shareholders. But modern leaders and contemporary leadership is about thinking about all stakeholders. So thinking about your employees and their families and your partners and your customers and the government and the city and the society. Again, I'm not arguing that we're perfect, but we do think about all stakeholders when we think about how you drive the corporation forward and how you set priorities and measure garner your resources, the critical resources that you have.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a kind of related subject that a couple of days ago, the investor Keith Robois and David Hannemeyer Hansen is an inventor of Ruby on Rails. They had it's still going on, I think, an argument on Twitter about the nature of work. And on the one side, you have this ideal that work in Silicon Valley means, bleeding from your eyeballs and putting everything you have into building your company, and that the person who puts forth the most work wins. And then the other side, you have what some people perceive to be a more measured or thoughtful attitude about it, where work is work, but you also need life and other things. What struck me, though, and that argument I think can be had in other places, but I was speaking to somebody about this just last night, and the thing they brought up to me, which I found interesting, was that it doesn't matter how hard somebody works, if the opportunities are not given or the opportunities are not available for them to grasp, then they can pour out every drop of lifeblood they have onto the stone and nothing will come from it. So I was just curious how Salesforce thinks about offering people opportunities to grasp and to work, so that when they do put forth the work and they do put in the effort, that you recognize that they're there and they have a pathway.
Right. That's a great question. I think for the tech industry, the technology industry, it's the essential question. The nature of work, it is changing. And we think about this concept of the fourth industrial revolution that's widely discussed, and the impact that automation is going to have on things that people did formerly with their hands, and that AI is going to have on the things that people formerly did with their minds and their voices. And 10 years from now, you're not going to recognize the nature of work. And there's literally billions of people, if they're not prepared for that next generation of what work is going to look like, that are going to be left behind without opportunities and not be prepared in the skills that they have. So the focus on K-12 education, the focus on getting education where it's not memorization, but you're learning creativity and collaboration and communication and critical thinking, that are skills that are elastic and they're transferable across whatever the jobs of the future hold. I mean, that's really the focus where I think people should be investing their time and really making a big effort in terms of technology in all industries. But I think we have a special responsibility because we're inventing large parts of the future. At Salesforce, we imagined this platform about a little more than two years ago, and it's called Trailhead. And it's just in its early stages, but it has hundreds of thousands of monthly active users. And Trailhead is all about a distance learning platform to enable people that don't necessarily have to have, it's not a prerequisite to have a 4-year computer science degree, to be able to participate in what we call the Salesforce economy. Mm-hmm. And the Salesforce economy, you know, we believe by 2020 we'll have on the 1.9 million jobs in it. And you look today in what we call the Salesforce economy, there's about 300,000 job postings out there for things like a Salesforce developer or a Salesforce admin. So the company imagined this platform, Trailhead, that will enable people, and it's free, and it's relatively easy, and it's fun, and it's gamified, to get engaged in the Salesforce economy and learn the skills to be like a Salesforce admin and be active, and that's a great job, vis-a-vis the sort of jobs that are going to be, obsoleted by AI or be obsoleted by robotic automation.
Very good. I'd like to do more, but I think we have a couple questions, so if you want to throw that.
We do. We're pretty tight on time, but I want to make sure that the audience gets an opportunity to ask some questions as well. First question. Many marginalized people have left Salesforce because they were microaggressed nonstop. What are you doing to change the bro culture at Salesforce?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say is, whomever asked that question, it's tprofit@salesforce.com. So what am I doing? The first thing I'm doing is I'm listening. And I'm listening to the experience of all. We welcome all. And so whatever those microaggression behaviors were, that's not consistent with our culture. That's the beauty of naming your culture. You can say that's not consistent with the Salesforce Ohana culture. And I'm willing to listen to anyone on what experience they have. So, and we're working hard to institutionalize the culture by really focusing on the Ohana groups and making sure that the Ohana groups, which are employee resource groups and kind of natural alignment that you would expect for Latina, women, Black, LGBTQ, et cetera, right? And I don't mean et cetera, I don't want to say the long litany if there's 9 of them, right? That they have clear executive sponsorship, they have clear alignment to a voluntary activity, and that they feel empowered and that it's fun and that they're highly engaged, and that we're soliciting all 25,000 plus people in Salesforce to either to become a member of one or more of the Ohana group. So those are things, that's the principal thing that we're doing to change the culture and making sure that from the top down that the executives are engaged in these groups, that the executives are great symbols, that the executives are out marching in pride, this month. That's what I'm working on.
Thank you. And we'll wrap up with this question. What is your biggest challenge when pushing the equality and inclusion agenda at Salesforce?
Yeah, I think across the industry, we're not unique on this challenge. The biggest challenge for the tech industry is the diversity of the workforce, right? It's obviously a duality. You have to have a great culture so that when people come, they stay and they feel loved and welcome and they can be themselves. But at the same time, you're working on an inclusive culture, which we spend many hours and days working on that. We're partnering with employee success and our recruiting teams to make sure that we're increasing the diversity of the slates that are being seen and taking non-traditional measures in terms of apprenticeships and internships, as well as the traditional measures to make sure that we have a great diverse pipeline coming in and that we're hiring the best people, but we're doing it from a diverse pipeline.
Very good.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.